This morning, if you would join me in the book of Acts, chapter 19. Acts chapter 19. The passage today is 21 through 41. I will read that. Now after these things were finished, Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem, after he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, saying, After I have been there, I must also see Rome. And having sent into Macedonia two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. About that time there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, Men, you know that our prosperity depends on this business. You see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people, saying that gods made with hands are no gods at all. Now, not only is there danger that this trade of ours falls into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship will be dethroned from her magnificence. When they heard this, they were filled with rage. They began crying out, saying, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. The city was filled with confusion, and they rushed with one accord into the theater, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. And when Paul wanted to go into the assembly, the disciples would not let him. Also some of the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and repeatedly urged him not to venture into the theater. So then, some were shouting one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and the majority did not know for what reason they had come together. Some of the crowd concluded it was Alexander, since the Jews had put him up forward. And having motioned with his hand, Alexander was intending to make a defense to the assembly. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, a single outcry arose from them, and all shouted for about 2 hours, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. After quieting the crowd, the town clerk said, Men of Ephesus, what man is there after all who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of the image which fell down from heaven? So, since these are undeniable facts, you ought to keep calm and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of our goddess. So then, if Demetrius and the craftsmen who are with him have a complaint against any man, the courts are in session and proconsuls are available. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you want anything beyond this, it shall be settled in a lawful assembly. For indeed, we are in danger of being accused of a riot in connection with today's events, since there is no real cause for it, and in this connection we will be unable to account for this disorderly gathering. After saying this, he dismissed the assembly. Father, I thank you for this passage that you have given us today. I ask that as we study it, your Holy Spirit would work through it, work into our lives, into our hearts, into our minds, that we might see how it applies to each one of us, how it applies to our life in the church, our life outside of the church walls, and how your truth never changes. In Jesus' name, amen. In our passage today, the Apostle Paul is nearing the end of his third missionary journey. He's endured many trials, many hardships, and his faithful service is bringing much fruit for Christ. Paul taught and lectured in Ephesus for over 2 years, And verse 10, if you were to look back there, verse 10 tells us that all who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. That means everybody had heard at some point. God was also performing great miracles. You'll recall from before, casting out demons through Paul. Even those who had practiced witchcraft and magic were confronted with the power of God, and many turned away from their false beliefs. I've got a slide for you at some point here. Actually, we'll have several of them, so I don't... Well, that's very handy that you have a laser pointer back there. Never mind the laser pointer person. The Apostle Paul here, the Holy Spirit is leading him again to spread the gospel to other places where other Christians either were or he's never been. And so he's going to revisit the Christians and the churches scattered through Macedonia. If you can find that, you can show them. It's the yellow over there on top. Macedonia, and then down into Greece. Did you find Greece? Excellent. Okay. Before sailing back to Jerusalem. That's his plan. And he seems to agree with the Holy Spirit on this plan. Paul is intent on preaching in Rome, which is very interesting because that is, of course, the center of the Western world at this time. That's the place to be. And so I ask you this morning, have you ever, or maybe you've known somebody who has felt a very strong desire to serve God in some place and in some fashion, and you've wondered, is this just my own urging, my own desire, or is this God's? And I'm sure you have. Many people have. For some Christians, they may wait years and years and years to finally realize what God's answer is. And like Paul, the answer may prove very startling. You see, I'm not going to keep you in suspense too long, but Paul did make it to Rome, and he did preach there, but the circumstances he had in mind were not exactly how God accomplished it. See, now you're going to have to stay to hear the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. So that was basically verse 21, actually, in our text. If you were to go to verse 22, he sends into Macedonia Timothy and Erastus. He's making preparations for his next journey, so he sends his fellow missionaries ahead of him. And by this point, remember, he's been there 2.5 years in Ephesus. He has written his 2 letters to the Corinthian church. Paul was a prolific writer and encourager and rebuker, so he has sent letters to them. And now that he's sent Timothy and Erastus to help the Christians in Corinth, which had a lot of problems in their church. If you haven't read 1 Corinthians in a while, they had all kinds of, they were just fighting all the time. This group said, we like this guy. This group said, well, we like this person. Remember, we're from Paul, we're from Peter, we're from Apollos. And then the really spiritual people said, well, we're just from Christ. So they all fought all the time, and they're tearing the church apart. So Paul sends his missionary friends to deal with the issue along with his letters that he has written. I'd like to read from 1 Corinthians 16. This is where Paul writes, and just 10 through 11, Paul tells these, unfortunately, immature Christians that when Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord, just as I am. No one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace, so that he may return to me. I am expecting him along with the brothers. Those are Paul's instructions as he sends Timothy. Verse 23, while Paul is still in Ephesus, remember he stays, it says, a little bit longer, the long-term effects of his ministry have created a problem. Have you ever wondered if the effects of your ministry, of talking to people, of your Bible studies might create a problem? Well, if you're preaching the truth in a place that doesn't like the truth, it's very likely that a problem will occur. The problem here is not Paul It's the message of Christ. In fact, it's that people were changing their lives. They were turning to the Lord and changing their lifestyles. That's what happened here in Ephesus. It meant that they quit their sinful practices, their pagan practices. The unbelievers began modeling their lives after Christ and the Bible, and it was having a very significant effect on that culture. And I know it's hard to believe today maybe, but the effects of Christian living have been observed throughout history in different cultures. They always improve society. America greatly benefited at different times from large percentages of people living by the Christian standards. You don't have to be a big expert on history to know that. England also. So when Charles Dickens was writing, and people before him, you could see that there were a lot of problems in society in England. A lot of orphans, a lot of addictions, a lot of broken families. England saw great cultural reforms in the culture due to Christian influence. In fact, rampant addiction was curbed, soup kitchens were opened, orphanages were opened, and the famous Salvation Army started. Not in America, in London. It had very positive effects on the culture. Of course, when Christians don't live as Christians, then those effects diminish. In verses 24 through 27, we can kind of put them together. And I won't reread them. They're there in front of you. There's a man named Demetrius. He's a craftsman of silver. He uses his skills to make small replicas of the temple of Artemis. Small replicas. The kinds you could take home with you and put in your own house. And so he gathers together other craftsmen, same trade, kind of like a guild meeting. Whatever hobby you have, there's a guild of you. Well, he gathers them all together and discusses of what he says is a very important matter. And before I get to the important matter, I want to give you a perspective on this worship that they had of Artemis. Let me ask you a question before we put up the next slide. I don't know the answer, but a lot of you, especially the men, will know. What is the length and width of an American football field? Come on. I know you guys like football. What are the dimensions? Anybody know? 100 by 50, he says. Ooh, so 120 by 53 is what the internet says. 120 feet by 53. Okay. So I don't even know. I just picked a picture. That's okay. So if it's not your team, I'm sorry. So that's pretty big, right? You can see that the crowd around there. Okay, this one you probably don't know either. What are the dimensions of a soccer field? Well, it's bigger. 360 feet by 225 feet. They run more, right? So that's a large area, but the Temple of Artemis was still bigger. This is what I'm trying to show you. In fact, how about the dimensions of Notre Dame in Paris? You think that's big, right? I mean, that's massive. Well, it measures 420 feet by 157. I'm not giving you the height of it. The Temple of Artemis, next slide, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its dimensions were 425 by 225 feet. This temple was huge. Okay. This is why the person doing the slide projector has the pointer. So what you need to understand is at this point in history, this was a huge attraction throughout the whole Mediterranean. Huge attraction. Not just because it was big, but I mean, this was a big deal. Some have suggested, and our text alludes to it a little bit, that the statue of Artemis was carved out of some fallen black meteor. Again, something very unusual. So the tradesmen that are making their living here, selling their expensive religious trinkets, right? And you go outside of a big visitor area and they're selling all their things. Well, this is what they do, and they're making a very good living doing that because this is religious. This is important. Lots of money. By the way, this was also the largest building in the Greek world. If you want to put the next slide up. Yes. It's a large, large building. Unfortunately, their particular worship also involved in this temple complex several hundred or thousand male and female prostitutes. This is the kind of worship that was going on. And according to verse 26, the effects of Paul's Christian ministry have economic repercussions now in Ephesus. Isn't that amazing? That the message of Christ and that the followers of Christ would be living in such a way that it would change society. When is the last time that has taken place? In this culture. When's the last time? Because in the last several decades, I think I see the opposite taking place in our country. So what does that mean? Do you use logic and say, well, if when Christians are behaving like God expects, culture changes, culture's not changing, so Christians are not behaving as God expects? I don't know. Is that fair? It's certainly something to think about. So they gathered together, these craftsmen. You can leave that. It's big. They make several charges. First, their businesses will fail and become a joke or of disrepute. Artemis will become irrelevant. And even this temple, this seventh wonder of the world, will become irrelevant. These are the charges. So verses 28 through 29, when these craftsmen heard this, they were filled with rage. This was not something they were happy about. Anger erupts from this meeting of idol makers. It spills out into the streets and they begin chanting. Again, I was thinking of the soccer fields or rugby, if you're into that. You know, the hooligans. And if you've ever watched them, they go out in the streets and they go crazy. Well, this is the idea. The city streets were filled with these men, and they were chanting the same 6 words over and over and over. It's in your text. They make their way to the city theater, right, where they would have big events, where they could gather many, many thousands at a time. And they pull along some of Paul's missionary friends, Gaius and Aristarchus. And I wonder how often we think about Paul's traveling companions and those who helped him in ministry. Because we think of Paul, and we hear about them every once in a while. How often do you think about the fact that they were real people and had real lives that were also invested into ministry? They were. They were real people with real lives. And they stayed in ministry. Many of them listened to the teaching, became Christians, and themselves leaders and workers of the Christian church. Gaius did not become the next Apostle Paul. He did not become Apollos. In fact, you're probably looking in your Bibles wondering, does he exist anywhere else right now? But his Christian character and his love and humility of Christ was exemplified in the Bible, which is why we should probably figure out who he is. Paul would commend Gaius by name in his letter to the Romans, chapter 16:23, where Paul says, Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy, sends you his greetings. That's character. Several decades later, the effect of Gaius' character were also noted by somebody else, the now aged Apostle John. John spent 30 years or so in the Ephesus area. So he would have known if there were leaders of the church. And sure enough, if you'd actually turn to me to the book of 3 John. So you have to head all the way over to Revelation, almost. Find 3 John. And we're going to stop on chapter 1 there. 3 John. This is what John the Apostle says, starting in verse 1. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, who I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought, therefore, to show hospitality to such people, so that we may work together for the truth. John continues, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loved to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. But then he continues, Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name. What an interesting letter by John. But he names people in the church. Did you see that? It seems Gaius by this time has become a leader in the church, is well known, and we learn that he is staying faithful to biblical truth. That much is very clear. He hasn't changed over time. He didn't go back to his pagan roots. In fact, and he didn't water down Scripture because he stayed true. John notes that Gaius has a loving character and is given to generous hospitality. That's what John says. And he says, especially to the Christians. Of course, all of us here this morning who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ should also show this kind of a changed life, right? We shouldn't be any different. We should show that the Holy Spirit lives within us and has changed us. If that's the case, then outsiders can look into our habits. Outsiders can look into our routines and our attitudes and be able to see that we behave differently than the unbelieving world. They should be able to see it. But note, this is not about following virtues. The Greeks were very, very good at that. Very stoic. They set up their virtues. They followed them. This is not what we're talking about. No, this is following Christ and the love that he has put upon us. That's what we are to follow. So now for a minute, I want you to think about your neighbors. Think about your friends, your acquaintances. Do you suppose that they would sing your praises like the Apostle John just sang Gaius' praises? It's just a question to think about. Now, if you're still there in 1 John, verse 12, John mentions someone named Demetrius, a follower of the truth. And although this is many years after the events in Acts, one wonders if this is the same idol maker that became a Christian. I will let you wonder. So now come back to Acts, if you would. In Acts, there's a riot taking place. They've assembled, they've dragged these two companions of Paul. And in verse 30, Paul wanted to go into the assembly, but the disciples will not let him. You know Paul by now, right? Paul is he's never one to shy away from a debate or an opportunity to present Christ, to present a case for what he believes. And he's willing to venture into this very chaotic arena. But not only the Christians told him to stay out, but even what they call the Asiarchs. These were like the city rulers or the board members of the city who said, this is really not a good place. You should probably stay out. This is not safe. Which is interesting because that means that the Christian influence had made it into the ruling class in Ephesus. It was having an effect on the culture. Verses 32 and through 34, so then some were shouting one thing and some were shouting another, for the assembly was in confusion. I like this. And the majority didn't know for what reason they had come together. That's like, there's always parts in the Bible that make me laugh. That's one of them. But because you know, the overarching sentiment in this large and noisy event was confusion. Lots of people everywhere. They're all yelling and yelling. Well, I don't know what they're yelling. They're yelling. So I'm here, though. And let me tell you something. This is what makes crowd mentality a little dangerous. If you've never studied it or been around, people, for whatever reason, are like drawn to crowds and noises. They're drawn to emotions and heated conversations, when in fact it's these events that are highly unpredictable and can turn volatile. So if this is not a biblical thing, by the way, if you're ever around a huge gathering that's getting very loud and very excited, you may want to back away until you can make some distance to see what's really going on. And this is what's going on here. There's energy, there's people, something's happening. The word is spreading, more people are, what's going on? They're coming, they're yelling, but nobody actually knows what's going on. And in the process, a Jewish man named Alexander, if you look in your text, he's about to climb onto the public platform and apparently say something. But the text doesn't say what he was going to say. He doesn't get a chance. We know that he's Jewish, that much. So various commentators here have suggested, well, maybe he was hoping to make a case that all of this ruckus had nothing to do with the Jews. That was these other group of people. It's not us. We're with you. Or maybe he was trying to say, look, we've worked side by side and we haven't denounced your God, so it's okay. We don't know. What we do know is that when they figured out he was a Jew, they started chanting, all of them. The whole city starts chanting these same 6 words over and over. It says for 2 hours. What a strange thing. What a strange thing. Verse 35, after quieting the crowd, the town clerk said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is guardian of the temple of the great Artemis?" The town clerk apparently is able to quiet down the uproar. He takes center stage. He would have been a keeper of the records and the finances for the town, which in this town was a big job. Lots of money, lots of finances. And he was also highly invested into the city and reported directly to Rome. this is a key point for him, somehow he's very cool-headed and rhetorically asks them, who does not know that Ephesus is devoted to Artemis and her temple? In other words, this is obvious. Everybody, the whole world knows this. Why are you chanting this? We already know this. And then he continues in 36 and 37. He continues, affirms that the temple and their religion are safe. In fact, the men in this crowd that they brought forward are not the issue. Why have you brought these men? Remember, Gaius and Aristarchus. He said, look, these guys you brought me, they're not spraying graffiti on the walls. They are not running around knocking over the statues. They're not stealing from the temple. Why are you bringing these people here? And let me remind you this morning, if you're a Christian, God has not called you to go graffiti and spray paint and be some sort of a Christian vigilante. Okay, I'm sorry. That's not a gift of the Holy Spirit. It's just not. So don't do that. Because Gaius left his mark in Christian history because he lived a holy life that was pleasing to God, not because he was a vigilante. So verses 38 to 40, you see we're getting close here. Demetrius and the craftsmen who are with him have a complaint. If they have a complaint, they should settle it in courts. Right? The matter is to be settled somewhere else. If you really have legal issues, if you really have issues, then go to the courts and settle it the legal way. Follow the normal channels, because the danger for this city manager, it's another way of saying the clerk, is that if this gets farther out of hand, the Roman soldiers will repress it, and word will get back to Rome. Yes, he has something to lose here. So let me put up our final slide here. How about that? You see, because we got to draw this all back home, don't we? Yeah. How about that? How many square feet? I like that you're paying attention. I should have prepared. So there are some elements in our text that we do need to pay attention to, because this is where we live, right? This is us. We're not over there with Artemis. And as Christians, we often err on one of two extremes. Some of us think we should follow pacifism and join Gandhi and sit quietly in the corners, in the background, amidst an increasingly godless society. There are groups that are, well, we just need to sit quietly and not do anything. Somehow that's being fair, and we're not stepping on anybody's rights, and we're being very tolerant somehow. And on the other side, there are the people who, well, we don't see them as much, but throughout history, who use Scripture to support violence against other humans. And history does show that. And some think they should gather their own angry mobs and their own campaigns to force change in the world. These are extremes. I think neither of them are exactly what the Bible teaches. Paul and the apostles never shied away from a public debate. They didn't shy away from teaching opportunities, Bible studies, conversations around food or coffee, even with other religious people. They didn't shy away from that. And of course, we don't need to shy away from that either. There's no need to. They need to hear it, so we have to tell them. We can't sit in the shadows, wringing our hands. And instead, because before I get to our final passage here, in the same way that Christians who lived out their faith changed societies, we will either change this one or be changed by it. Watch it go down the drain. And we really need to think as Christians, am I living in such a way as a Christian that society, little by little, can be changed? Or am I living little by little in such a way that I blend into the society? Well, let me offer Romans chapter 12. Not all of it, most of it. Paul gives us the recipe as Christians. Romans chapter 12, Paul says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice that is holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." He goes on to say, "Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord.' On the contrary," he ends, "if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. So do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." So for those of us that gather here at this church, we need to be changed, transformed in heart and mind, so that we live lives that are pleasing to God. That's what we need to do. We would show our love to others, but stay away from evil. We need to be joyful, not proud, Paul says. Help where we can. And remember that it is ultimately God who will judge even the evil motives of people's hearts. Let me offer a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for this study we've had. Thank you for all the words that you have left for us, all the examples of what it means to live a Christian life. And I ask that you would help us now, that by your Spirit you would in fact transform us, each one of us, that you would change us from the inside out, that we wouldn't stay in our old ways, in our watered down ways, and in whatever ways we have been operating, but change us so that we may live a life that is pleasing to you, and that by doing so we would affect the culture and the world around us. In Jesus' name, amen.